I'm gonna use this shit again. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Yep.
Oh, you go by Michael or Mike?
Mike is fine.
All right, cool. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We were emailing briefly before we decided to jump on and have the conversation. And what I said is that I always love talking to fellow SEOs. We're
hmm
kind of our own little club, so to speak, simply because the foundation behind search marketing, in my view, is a lot different than all the other forms of digital marketing, simply because it's inbound.
hmm
Um, and and so I want to definitely take some time to dig into some of the details of it, like what's working for you and your agency right now
hmm
with online search. What are some of the maybe the changes that we've seen in the industry. But before we even get there, I
hmm
like to start my shows with just learning a little bit about your journey. So, like, please tell me how you got involved in design. I read that you started with web design, how you got involved with marketing, and how it turned into a really great entrepreneurial career for you.
Yeah, I think that's another really interesting thing about SEOs is that like the path to become an SEO
Sure.
is so different for
Yeah.
everybody. No one was like, "Yo, I want to be an SEO when I grow up."
Mm-hmm.
So it's always fascinating to see how people got here. So yeah, to your point, I did web development before that was like a real like job. Like my first job was a high school internship at Microsoft where I like worked on their internal websites, and then also I built a couple external ones too. But that just came from me being a bored kid and knowing how to code from 12 and just reading all types of books. I remember I read a book called Making Cool Websites with HTML, and that's how I learned HTML.
On MySpace.
Nah, man, this is way before MySpace. I'm a little older than that. So this is like 95, right? And then I got the job at Microsoft, and then I just like kept getting little jobs like that and continuing to learn stuff. I went to school for computer science, dropped out because I wanted to make music instead. And so that's what I was doing, like full time, making music, touring, and things like that. And then in '06, I got into a bike accident and didn't have health insurance because I was a rapper.
Wow.
And I had to get a job to pay my medical bills. And the first company that hired me was the SEO agency. And so I would keep my SEO jobs until my boss would piss me off, and then I would go back on tour. And then eventually I started working at a multinational ad agency called Razorfish. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like I like this. And it just kind of like snowballed from there where I started getting involved in thought leadership. I moved from Philly to New York and just way more opportunity here. And after working at a series of agencies, I was like, I'm pretty sure I can do a better job at this myself. Doesn't feel like that right now during the coronavirus, but
Mm.
otherwise, it's been pretty true. And I've been really happy to, put together a really awesome team of people that keep me motivated. I more feel like I work for them than they work for me.
Yeah.
And we're all just trying to, do awesome stuff for our clients.
There's a lot of places that I want to take this.
hmm
Um, I'm really interested to learn about your hip hop career because I was looking at some of your projects, and I'm a hip hop fan, and I'm also from Philly. I didn't realize that you were from there, so I'm sure that we got a lot in common. But but before I dive into that, you mentioned something about building a great team around you, and I have found that to be true on almost every CEO that I've worked with, especially with SEOs, because you start as like a one-man band and you're
hmm
doing the work, like you're deep into the work, and then eventually you figure out that like you don't even really do SEO anymore. It's really manage people,
hmm
deal with clients, manage expectations. In my case, I don't want to speak for you, but it's been a lot of like taking a step back to see what the best route from like onboarding a client to helping them reach their goals is. And so I'm just curious if that's been the same experience for you. Are you still really deep into the work of SEO, or do you find that running the team and running the company is where most of your time is going?
It's definitely more running the team in the company now. And that was more of
You got a
a
big team.
I mean, it's a good amount of people.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it was really like a decision I made at the end of last year. I was like, I'm getting out of client work because frankly, I don't want to do anybody's SEO site audits anymore. Like I've done a million of them, and that part is boring for me at this point. What is exciting for me is working with people and getting them up to speed, and then seeing what they come up with that I didn't come up with. Like
Mm,
I I like that our team has begun to like dramatically improve our deliverables because every deliverable we have that isn't designed, like I made it, right? Because like you said, I was doing it first. And after working at a series of agencies, there was a lot of things that I would continue to improve, like every agency. And then, once I got here, I was like, all right, boom, I'm going to improve all this stuff. But it kind of stayed static for a while. And now my team is being like, all right, what's the best way to do this? How do we improve this? And it's really exciting to see where they take things. But yeah, for a long time, I always felt like, oh, I don't want to be a marketing speaker that doesn't actually do things,
yeah.
that can't really tell you stuff. And, I do work on a couple projects here and there, but just kind of like to keep me sharp and stay on top of things. But I'm
Hmm.
not touching every project like I used to.
Do you get annoyed about the marketing circle where we have, quote, thought leaders who aren't necessarily skilled in the, let's call it the science of marketing? Is that something that like it bothers me? I'll give you permission to talk about it. It definitely annoys me.
I
But
mean,
I don't want to speak out too much.
I think that they have a place. I think that there's like marketing motivational speakers,
Mm,
and you see them, and especially if you are like more junior, you get really excited to do your work and come up with things. So there's value in that. It's just that's not necessarily who I want to be. I want to be somebody that anytime you come across something I've written or you see me speak, you learn like one to two things that you're like, yo, I can use this and I can, take this away and level up in my career. If I was a marketing speaker that just had like the one tactic that I mentioned with every story that I give you every time, um, yeah, I don't think I would be happy with my contribution. So it's more about like just my experience of it, not necessarily that it's necessarily like a bad thing. Because there
hmm.
are definitely people who are like, yeah, I listen to Gary Vee and now I want to get up and go to work. That's dope. Do that. Like if that's your thing, do that. It's just not who I want to be.
Yeah, I think Gary Vee is usually the guy that comes to mind with that. I used to read a whole lot of Brian Clark with Copyblogger. I'm a part of Copyblogger, and
Mm-hmm.
there's another guy named Ramit Sethi who does
Mm-hmm.
"I Will Teach You to Be Rich," and I just appreciated so much the difference in structure with the content and the educational material that they put out in
Mm-hmm.
terms of they don't just give you guidelines. They say like this is exactly how you do it, and
Mm-hmm.
this is another conversation we don't need to go down here unless you want to, because I know that you're a writer. But when I write material for any one of my sites, I really, really try to focus on like how can somebody walk away from this learning how to implement something that they didn't know how to implement before, not necessarily be, like running around with pom poms and trying to hype themselves up, but like learning a new skill.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's exactly how I approach it. But
Yeah.
I think that there are people that are not motivated in the same way that you or I am, where it's just like intrinsically, I want to feel as though I've done the best possible thing,
Mm,
and those people get a lot of value out of like watching a Gary Vee video every morning or whatever it is. So I'm not trying to knock that. I'm just saying it's not for me.
sure. Yeah, I feel the same way. Uh, okay, cool. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your journey to go on your own. I'm always fascinated with this idea of entrepreneurship, as though if you don't just come right out of the gate in like middle school and like you're not like running a lemonade stand when you were 7, like I'm a full-blown born entrepreneur, like you did something wrong. I think in like 97% of the cases, it makes a lot of sense to build experience, like work with other people, get a paycheck, learn the industry to the point where like you're armed with the knowledge to know what it takes to manage books, manage clients, deal with invoices, like read a P&L, you know?
Hmm.
So, um, keeping this one open ended for you, talk about like the experience of all of the jobs that you had in your career and the decision to finally take that leap to say, like, you know what, I can do this on my own and I'm gonna go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, I already had somewhat of an entrepreneurial spirit. I think that if you are an independent rapper and you're trying to do it as a living, you are effectively an
Yeah,
entrepreneur.
I was gonna ask you about that. You have to learn how to like book shows
Yeah,
and
exactly,
hustle, you
exactly.
know?
And I always tell other independent rappers that I know that are looking to do something else, that like the skill set that we develop doing that can be applied so well to any type of like business thing, because again, that intrinsic motivation of like wanting to be great or wanting to achieve something is something that a lot of people don't have, but you definitely have it if you're like, I don't want to get signed by a label, I'm going to do this thing myself and I'm going to figure out how to make it happen, right? So I do agree that, having some place to like show you the ropes and also having another organization that will like support what you're trying to do. I definitely give props to the guys that I acquire because of the fact that they were like, we want you to come on and be our face.
Yeah.
And then they invested in that. And that definitely helped continue me on the trajectory that I had started on my own, but I didn't have to pay for it. And I had a business that was like pretty much behind all the things I wanted to do in most cases. And so, there was a lot of value in watching that. There's a lot of value in me watching how, the co-CEOs had ran the business. And it may not have necessarily been like, oh, that's what I need to do. A lot of it was like, that's what I don't need to do.
Mm.
But, being able to learn on someone else's dime is incredibly valuable. So I think that even if you're not immediately an entrepreneur, there may be opportunities to be an entrepreneur wherever you do work. And then you can specifically learn whatever it is that you need to know in order to like hit the ground running with whatever you start. There's a lot of things I didn't know, like managing finances, doing books, things like that. I know anything about that. Like I wish that is something that had been something I was more involved in other organizations. But it was like one of the only skill gaps I still had. And so once I started my own business, it's like, all right, boom, let's double down and learn everything we need to know about that in the way that I know, everything I need to know about actually doing the work. And it's just been easier because I had less gaps after working with a whole bunch of different people. And then also being that I already had like some entrepreneurial experience through music, there was just less to learn once I got to the point of running my own business. So I would definitely encourage people to, use the opportunities where it's lower risk for them to learn whatever they need to know about running a business.
So when was the moment when you went for it? Because inevitably there is like that leap of faith, right?
Yeah.
To run a company, you got to be all in. So what
Hmm.
was like that moment? Do you remember deciding?
Yeah, when I was gonna leave iAcquire, I had been talking about starting an agency, and ultimately I left, and I basically like kind of stuck my toe in the water, see if I could get some clients.
Hmm.
Things were happening pretty slow, so I got another job. Hated working there. Was gone after 4 months, and I was like, you know what? This is the universe telling me something.
Yeah.
And I had a couple dollars in the bank, and I was like, all right, well, if I fail at this, I can at least pay my rent for the next 6 months. And so I just went after it. And, as soon as I like really bought into the idea, I had two clients just kind of come out of nowhere,
Right.
like out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, well, suddenly, I now have, what was it like? It was like 20K MRR. All right, cool. I'm now a business, right? And, what I was doing was, like you said, basically doing the work myself, and then also bringing in friends as like contractors for a while until that just became untenable and I needed to hire people because we were making too much in revenue to count on people who are just like kind of halfway available. and it basically just snowballed from there.
And that's so funny how that happens. So it always reminds me of I don't get too much into the woo woo motivation stuff, but I do remember this quote by Will Smith about the power of like making a decision, and
Hmm.
how when you just like decide, like, this is where I'm at, somehow, call it whatever you want, whether it's God or law of attraction or just energy, like,
Hmm.
you things have the best way I always heard put it, I don't know if it's Will Smith that said that, but where focus goes, energy flows,
Hmm.
and just like as soon as you make that decision, somehow the universe like conspires to help you get what you want. And I think that what you said there is just another example of, it's one of those things where you don't have to say like, just believe me. I've talked to enough
Hmm.
people where it's just the same thing over and over again. Like when you just make some decision where you're like, you know what, if I fail, whatever, I'm gonna go for it. Somehow things
Hmm.
just come your way.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to work on manifesting that a bit more right now.
Yeah, right. Let's just manifest the virus to disappear. Okay, cool. So one more little tidbit about your journey before we start talking a little bit more about what you see going on in the state of SEO. But I read on your work experience that you worked at Moz. Um,
So I never worked at Moz. I've always been a Moz associate. Um, and I mean always. Since like, I
for a
don't know, I
while.
think yeah, like 2011 or so.
Yeah.
And so what that means is just like I blog for them, I'd answer the Q&A,
Cool.
I give feedback on the product. And there have been instances where I've worked more closely with them, like for like market research projects or marketing efforts or whatever, but I never physically worked there. Although Rand and I had that conversation previously, and the only reason I didn't do it was because I didn't want to move to Seattle. So love the Moz team. I love the things that they've been able to accomplish. Um, I wish them nothing but success.
For sure. I had Rand on the show. I guess it was about 5 weeks ago. It was the day before he launched.
Spark Toro.
Yeah, SparkToro. Thank you so much. It just slipped my mind for a second. I was like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. Uh, I think SparkToro is like a really, really cool tool from an SEO application. I was telling him that it makes outreach a whole lot easier because
Hmm.
you don't have to do as much research to figure out like, who the hell am I trying to get in touch with.
Hmm.
I see the industry of what he's doing, audience insight, audience intelligence, probably being more applicable to like PR firms,
Hmm.
like, influencers, or what influencers really are, not just, like half naked chicks on Instagram. But it's a cool product. Rand and like Whiteboard Friday and that whole team, obviously the last couple of years things have changed for them with some of the other competitors, but they were like really, really groundbreaking. And in my life, especially, like I would read all of it. I'm sure if you were on their blog, I've read your work somewhere. I read everything and all the videos,
Hmm.
the whole shit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the thing. Maz was so influential for my success.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a longer story, but basically, my really good friend that I rapped with is Rand's cousin.
Oh,
And
wow.
like, yeah. And we were on tour in like Sweden somewhere, and we're on a train, and he's like, yeah, Mike, I know you're doing SEO. I've got this cousin with the software company. I'm like, who's your cousin? And then he's like, yeah, Rand Fishkin. I'm like, what? And I started getting involved in like blogging on Moz, and I reached out to Rand, and he was nothing but cool to me.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
cool.
when we met in person, it was just like we clicked, and he was very helpful in like helping me get conference speaking, and he's helped me get clients. Like he's just, I can't say enough good things about Rand Fishkin. He's just a really good friend, and I definitely appreciate everything he's done for me and also everything he's done for our industry.
No, I love it, man. That's so funny too, because it wasn't that long ago, maybe 6 years ago, when you mentioned SEO software company, it's like there's only one. So like it's gotta be them. All right. Um, Thank you for sharing all that with me. I
Of
always know
course.
that when people reach out to me after the show, like getting to know the guest is one of the things that I really, really try to do. And I'm always appreciative when people are like open and vulnerable with their stories and their successes and their failures. And so
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
All right, so let's talk about Google. I'm half a Google fanboy and half
Hmm.
like terrified of what goes on with search. I think one of the topics that I am most inclined to talk about is just Google's recent decision to hog a lot of the search traffic with their own online assets. Like, I've gotten a lot of success from it because a lot of our clients are local clients, and so with GMB stuff being at the top of the search at most searches, it's proved really well and it's proved really successful. But there's another side of me that just feels like, man, this is still banking on somebody else to, like, allow you to earn the branded or the search or the local traffic that theoretically should be yours anyway. Like,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on that? How do you feel about the idea that the first page of the search is like constantly in flux?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. On some level, I'm like, hey, it's their website. You got to
Yep.
roll with it.
Yep.
And then, you should also be diversifying your traffic sources and all
Yep.
that. But end of the day, what we do the most is SEO. So like, how do we account for all this stuff? And I think part of it is there is a lot of opportunity in places where Google is not as active in doing these types of things. And if your brand is big enough, you can create search terms.
Hmm.
So I think that it's one of those things where you got to think about, where is the actual opportunity for my business? If it is in just local, then you're good, like you said, because Google's getting more, or excuse me, local's getting more visibility. But if you're a brand that has the power to create a term by, running a TV commercial, and you're worried about these unbranded terms or whatever, then do that. That's a way that you can capitalize more on search. But yeah, just like brass tacks, I think that there are definitely instances where it's like, Google, you're not really playing fair.
Mm,
But at the same time, when have SEOs really played fair?
of
You know,
course.
like, like, so I feel both ways about it. Like, I feel like that's messed up that Google, you're doing that, but I'm like, all right, it's also, an opportunity for those of us that can be even more creative. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. It's always a delicate thing to have these conversations because a lot of people, if we get into like some of the technical logo, where like you and I could rap back and forth about it, I don't want
Hmm.
people to think like, what are they talking about? But
Hmm.
I do see what you mean, where every time there's a change, there's another side of my head that thinks like, okay, well, where's the new opening?
Right.
And there's always been, every single time, especially with search, not so much for social media because, social media pulls the rug out from underneath their brands over and over again. But with search,
Hmm.
like, there's always been an opening. And I like what you said there about almost inventing your own search terms. It reminds me of a Seth Godin blog I read a while ago where he said, I don't need to rank for keywords because I invented the keyword purple cow because of how
Exactly.
successful his book was. And so it's like there's nothing for him to rank for because people already have an idea in their mind, and Google is just kind of the vessel that connects the user with the
Exactly.
idea.
Exactly. I'll give you, a real example. So we were working with a large financial services company, and they were rolling out a new product there, and they were like, we want to optimize this page or these pages for queries related to charge card. And I was like, yeah, but people are searching for credit card. Credit card is a much bigger monthly search volume. And they were like, no, 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 we're going with charge card, and we're going to run media and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, well, if you don't really want traffic, go with this.
Yeah.
But they were 100% right. They ran a couple commercials where they prominently displayed the word charge card, said it over and over, and search volume spiked after that. And it also ultimately stayed much higher than where it was before. So that's my point. Like, big enough brands that can run media in that way can change search behavior and then capitalize on it. And there was a campaign that my girl worked on when she was at one of the bigger agencies, and it was with Axe body spray, and they did
Mm.
this thing where they had this commercial with Kiefer Sutherland, where he's talking about, you know, his like perfect woman that got away, and he called her Susan Glenn. And so what my girls team did is they seeded the web with a whole bunch of stuff about Susan Glenn, kind of like a reverse reputation management campaign.
Yeah.
And then once the search volume was there, they could capitalize by owning the entire SERP
Yeah.
for this keyword that didn't exist before.
I love it. So clever. And those are the kind of things I'm talking about, where there's always an opportunity somewhere. You just have to think creatively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. Okay. And then one of the other things I love talking about SEOs is their strategy to build links. For people listening that don't necessarily understand what that means, all you got to know is one of the probably the most important thing, and probably always will be the most important thing to get your web page at the top of Google, is to get links on other web pages that point to your site. And
Mm-hmm.
it's always kind of been, I don't want to say controversial with SEOs, but there's just nobody really knows the best way to do it. Let's just say that. Like, we're all trying to figure it out. And I read on your website on iPullRank that you guys are very um, you have an internal strategy that you really stick by.
Mm-hmm.
And please just elaborate on how you guys go about doing outreach, and also just say why you think that's the best way and why it's been successful for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So on our site, we've got like a what we do section, and we also got a what we don't do
I
section.
loved that, by the way. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, thanks. And you know, one of the things that we say is we don't do large scale link building. So if you're trying to go to somebody that's going to get you 1,000 links a month, that's not going to be us. And all the link building that we do is going to be driven by content. And I think that there's two tiers of link building. There's like the digital PR, where you're reaching out to
Yep.
media outlets and journalists and things, and you're working with them to get them to cover you in a story. And then there's the link building, where it's like blogger outreach or resource pages or broken link building, things like that. And that's the lower tier, where you're dealing with like bloggers, webmasters, and so on. And so the approach is generally the same, in that we identify or create an asset. And when we're in the early stages of that, we reach out to a series of people that have, you know, affinities for the subject matter that we're talking about. And that's where, like you said, Spark Toro can be used pretty heavily in the outreach process, is identifying those people. And you know, we reach out to them and say, hey, we're about to launch this thing, or we've got this asset that we're, you know, touching up. Is this something that you'd be interested in? Is there any feedback that you have, so that we get their buy-in? And so we generally will set like a certain minimum number of people that we get yeses from before we move forward with that piece of content. And then, you know, ultimately, if we find that's not getting traction, then we may not move forward with launching that asset. We may switch to something else. And in some cases, we do get good feedback from people, and then we'll augment the piece of content in that way. And then once we launch it, we will then, you know, let them know, like, hey, this thing launched, can you link to it? And, you know, at that point, we kind of look at it like a funnel, or
It's a numbers game.
exactly. And then we're like, okay, you know, measure how well the messaging worked versus the piece of content, and then use that to continue to build links. And, you know, there's definitely situations where we can go through that and yield like hundreds of links, because the content asset was so compelling. But we don't commit to saying we're going to get you hundreds of links a month.
Mm.
We're more like, all right, you know, we'll probably aim for like 30 or 50 or something like that, and continue to refine the approach so we get as much as we can out of it. So yeah, that's our primary approach. But we've also, excuse me, been watching um, what Ross's team has been doing lately, Siege Media, where they've been doing all these things where they're creating assets that are going to passively get more links. And, you know, they do a lot of like state of content and so on. So we've been starting to add that to the repertoire as well, because effectively it's like a better version of what we were doing, in that it's scalable to have a series of different topics that work really well for different audiences and things like that. Whereas we would go through the process each time to be like, okay, who's the audience? What's resonating in the space? What is the bespoke thing that we need to create every time, and then go through that whole process. So I really like the things that Ross's team has been doing to really scale that approach.
I like everything that you talked about. Man, there's a lot of places to go with this. We, like most, well, my agency has been around for 10 years. And
Mm-hmm.
the first 2 years, it was pretty typical, figuring out what we're doing, outsourced a lot of stuff, came back with like spreadsheets of like a couple thousand links, and quickly realized, I don't think this is working. And
Mm-hmm.
we just didn't know what we didn't know at the time. But if there's one thing that I'm proud of in terms of the work that we've done, is we committed to doing outreach one relationship at a time, to where it's more than just a link, it's a network of people that you can reach out to, that I don't even know how to explain it really. Like, you build a conglomerate of people that have shared shared content, shared messages, shared ideas, that all kind of realistically are going for the same audience of a couple 100,000 or a couple million people, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And those like relationships turn into opportunities, whether it might be a backlink, whether it might be like a mention, whether it might be like, hey, shout this out in your newsletter. It's been a grind, and I think ultimately it's what separates good agencies from bad agencies, is like, how willing are you to do that online networking, basically, because that's what it is. Like, I feel like you can replace the word backlinks with just like networking,
Yeah,
because it's the
I agree with that.
relationships that you make. Yeah.
I agree with that. Definitely. And the interesting thing is that the skill set is the same as doing outbound sales.
Yeah,
But
it really
it's so
is.
it's so funny that the SEO industry kind of like frowns on outbound sales, but we do link building the way that we do.
I can't believe you're talking about this. We've had the same conversation inside. Like I said, my agency is in South Florida,
Mhm.
and I think I saw somewhere that you guys were in South Beach, so I'm sure you're aware that South Florida has like a ton of phone rooms, and there's just
Mhm.
like a real outbound sales culture. And every time
Yep.
I find one of these guys and they think like, I don't know anything about SEO, I was like, do you mind getting told no, like getting hung up on? And they're like, you
Mhm.
kidding me? I've been getting hung up on for 4 years. I'm like, like, perfect. You're
Mhm.
perfect for the job. Granted, it has a little bit of more like nuance and a little bit more like, it's not quite as aggressive as just like smile and dial, because there's
Mhm.
common goals to be involved. But yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying. That's so funny that you brought that up. um yeah, great. So what what is your thoughts over the next 5 years? Do you think that content is always going to be the center of inbound search? Do you think that the algorithms are going to like continuously um, get more and more sophisticated as to where they just know what the user intent is going to be, and it's going to be more and more difficult to, quote, trick algorithms? How do you think this is all going to play out over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think things are going to get more specific. I think
Yeah.
that the ultimate goal of Google is to be more predictive rather than reactive to your query, and you see that with things like Google Discover, the assistant stuff. Like all of that is trying to like figure out your needs before you tell it. And so I think what ultimately is going to happen is that Google is going to try to make the results more specific to you. Like we've already got personalization, but I think it's going to be even, you know, more specific, more personalized. Like it's going to be an algorithm of one rather than like a broad algorithm.
Wow.
And so there's going to be, some elements of that are complicated because of the fact that it's going to create filter bubbles. You're going to see what you expect and so on. And there's always going to be their need to like split the difference there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be far more difficult to apply broad tactics to
To
get to
everyone.
a specific person, right? Like I
Yeah.
think, you know, on our end, it's going to be more about market segmentation and like creating content very specifically for specific groups, which I think more and more people on the SEO side think of it as like for the keyword rather than for the specific audience. And, you know, I mean, I'm biased because that's been our approach for a long time, like, you know, doing the market research and building personas, aligning it with keywords and aligning all that with the content. But I think ultimately that's where they're trying to go. They want to be able to get you precisely what you're looking for. And then some of these modes of search, like some of these tools, you're not going to get 10 things to choose from. Like Google Assistant isn't going to read you 10 answers. It's going to give you one. And so I think that's ultimately where they're trying to go, is like, how do we give you one answer
Wow.
for you? And as SEOs, we have to provide that for very specific audiences.
My first reaction is like, that's terrifying. But then when you take a second to think back, it's not, because all it does is it like you said, it just makes the long tail of not just the keyword, but the actual audiences, like the tribes, the groups of people that are into a specific thing. It
Mm-hmm.
just makes content more applicable to answer specific questions for specific people. So there's still an opportunity there. You know, that's why I keep coming back to this, because no matter how much it changes, there's always a way to find the people that, there's always a way to create something to solve the problems for the people that you're trying to get in touch with. And I think that's kind of what Google is. It's just a problem solving machine.
Yeah, and when you think about, you know, digital advertising, if you think about like Facebook, for instance, that's what you're doing when you're buying Facebook ads. You're like, I want to get to a very specific audience, and you create the content you think that's going to work for them, but you pay to put it in front of them. What Google is ultimately trying to do, from my perspective, is kind of mimic that and using the person themselves as the targeting vector, and then your content just has to very precisely match them. Otherwise, it doesn't get visibility for people it's not for.
Yeah. Wow. Great prediction. I'm going to keep my eye on that. And I think we all can reasonably assume that that's where things are going.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mike. Shit, man. Thank you so much for the talk. I just love talking to nerds about this, and like, so I always say like half the fun of having a podcast isn't just to build my own brand. It was just to sit down and have conversations with people that like I usually wouldn't. I think that if I'm ever in New York or whatever, you and I could get together and probably have a lot of commonalities. So
Yeah,
thank you so much for your time.
of course.
iPullRank.com. I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. Do you have like a personal site? I saw that you had an underground hip hop site that you were working on.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just those two. iPull Rank is where you're gonna get most of the information about the things
Nice.
we talked about. And yeah, I'm pretty loud on Twitter too. So just iPull
Yeah.
Rank.
All right. I'll make sure that you're linked up in the show notes. Mike, thank you so much for your time. It was really
Thanks
great
for
talking
having me,
to you.
Tim.
All right, brother.
Same. All right.